This is a big day, Mr. Xu. Help us to understand what will AIIB really mean for the others, because finally they have already signed the agreement.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think what we should understand is this has surpassed everyone's expectation. Just within a few months' time, I mean, we have seen this snowball effect, and most major economies have joined. In fact, quite a number of OECD countries have joined the bank. I think this is very extraordinary.
100 billion US, 25% goes to countries beyond Asia, including the UK. Mr. Naylor, you are coming originally from the UK. Help us to understand what would that mean for your economy and also a possibility of investment of your country.
Well, I think the AIIB is hugely important and significant for not just the UK, but for our European partners as well. The relationship between the UK, between Europe, the rest of Europe and China is driven by economics and trade. And there is less of a concern or less of a focus on the geopolitical significance of this bank. So the Europeans, they've got their mind on the economics of this. China is Europe's second largest trading partner. Europe is China's largest trading partner, and they'll be hoping that European companies and businesses in the short term might benefit from participating in some of the AIIB's projects.
I see.
But then also in the longer term, there are longer trade opportunities for European companies, and that's one of the main reasons why they have joined.
Right, it seems a lot of people and countries are very enthusiastic about AIIB, the idea, except probably the United States, at least for now, Mr. Dollar. I understand you and your colleagues have been advising the administration, in fact, to play a role in AIIB, but the result is not necessarily so. What do you make of the final signing of the agreement, the mini constitution of AIIB, and how this would function in the future from your perspective?
I think it's great that 57 countries have signed up. There are actually quite a few Americans like myself who've been providing some advice and help to the AIIB Secretariat. And a lot of major American intellectuals have spoken out in favor of the bank, people like Ben Bernanke and Larry Summers. So, I think the U.S. administration made a mistake in how it handled this. The U.S. and its European allies definitely share some concerns about governance of the bank. But the Europeans chose to jump in and try to influence the governance from the inside, which personally I think makes a lot of sense. U.S. stayed on the outside. I think it was a diplomatic mistake.
What is China's role? Because earlier people talk about certainly infrastructure is very much needed in the Asian region. However, people are concerned there's would be geostrategic issues also involved, and people are afraid that China is going to dominate the whole decision-making process. Before I give you this question, let me just read out some of the specific numbers that our audience want to have in mind. First of all, China, 30% contributing to the overall 100 billion and getting a voting right of 26%. And according to the constitution of AIIB, all of the so-called operational and financial policies would only be made with the supermajority decision. So, Mr. Xu, is this, at least coming from the paper, a China-dominated institution?
That's clearly not the case. I think China is aware of some of these concerns. So, for example, whether the bank will be used as a vehicle for China to export excess capacity, and whether people want to join the link between this bank and some of the initiatives such as One Belt, One Road. I think precisely because of those concerns, China deliberately chose a rather understated role in this organization, and China has got no voting right, no veto right. Veto right. So I think this over time will dispel some of these notions.
Chinese President Xi Jinping today, when he was meeting all of the representatives from countries coming from signatory countries of AIIB, he was talking about using several words. Mr. Naylor, I want to read these words to you: openness, inclusiveness, and also mutual benefits. This is he has been repeatedly talking about when it comes to AIIB, but there might be times when issues come up, countries just would not agree with one another. So eventually, will the governing structure have a final say in the debate? And are we going to see a very civilized debating process if issues arise?
Well, it's certainly very early days to be able to make a judgment as to how these kind of discussions will take place. But looking at the actual constitution that was announced today, it does appear that a lot of the decision making will be based on the technical aspects of projects. I think China still does have a de facto veto. That's partly understandable. It's actually, when you look at the AIIB's constitution and compare it with the World Bank's constitution or the IMF's constitution, it's actually pretty similar. The weightings are obviously very different, and the AIIB was really born out of a number of things. One, it was born out of a frustration with the current international economic architecture, right, particularly the United States, the Congress not reforming the IMF quota voting system and the World Bank system. But more importantly, actually, this was driven by a need, a real need to invest more in infrastructure in Asia. The Asian Development Bank itself said that Asia needs something like $8 trillion US
It
worth
is true.
of investment.
Those messages have been repeatedly said over the months. But Mr. Xu, Mr. Naylor made a statement, so-called the de facto veto decision-making possibility. I don't know how he's reaching that conclusion, because according to the so-called supermajority, according to dictionary, at least we find, that is something between 67 to 90%. So 57 to 90% of those who have voting rights have to say yes, so that an important decision can be passed. I'm not sure whether the de facto really is making a sense here, but I want to hear your opinion, because you're the expert.
I think I want to just paraphrase, I think, some of the word being used by President Xi Jinping. I think he used this notion mutual beneficial. I mean, this is not going to be a vehicle for geopolitical issues. It's not going to be used as a tool for international aid, as what China has done in the past, in the 70s, 80s. It's going to be mutually beneficial. And also imagine, with all the European countries, they are going to bring institutional investors, pension fund, insurance companies. So
this is investment that we are really talking about. This is business deal that we are really talking about, even though it will be good for the long term of many countries.
Yes.
Mr. Dollar, I have to invite you in, because you once served as the representative of the World Bank here in China. And now the issue is whether the AIIB will be able to work with some of the other multilateral development banks. World Bank, that's one. Asia Development Bank, Europeans and also Africans, and also BRICS countries, they have all their own development bank. OECD countries have their own institutional investing mechanisms. So are oil-rich countries. So we have many of these vehicles. How will they correlate with one another is a big question mark, even though Mr. Xi Jinping said today it's going to work very hard through that. Mr. Dollar.
Right. So I think the existing banks have all expressed an interest in working with the new bank, and that's very common in the development business. Particularly if you have large, complicated projects, you often get, for example, the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank working together. AIIB can fit in very nicely. If they want to get going quickly, it makes sense to find some existing projects and co-finance them. But then, of course, AIIB will also want to establish its own independence. So we'll see both freestanding AIIB projects, and we'll see some co-financing. I think this will all have the effect of making the existing banks more efficient, so I think it's a very nice addition to the global architecture. The
World Bank President, Mr. Jim, already congratulated the AIIB for the final signing of the Constitution. This is what he said. He said, with strong environment, labor, and procurement standards, AIIB join us and other development banks in addressing the huge infrastructure needs that is needed in the region. Mr. Xu, here comes to the governing issue. What about the standards? That's always been debated. Mr. Lou Jiwei has already talked about China's finance minister, talking about some of the so-called professionalism within AIIB. How is that going to be reached?
I think the short answer is I don't know, but I think we are going to find out. There will be some challenges. So for example, we may have to come across a situation, for example, involving local officials who might be corrupt, for example, or we might get in the situation infrastructure investment is actually too narrow. I mean, maybe we have to expand this over time. But but there's no point to talk about this. I think it's going to be a learning process for everyone.
There's always the debate between a trade-off about efficiency and also fairness and professionalism. Mr. Naylor, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they have said that over the next 6 months, as they approach the launch, that they'll be looking to develop the corporate governance structures around the projects, the procurement process, looking at providing or setting out the environmental parameters. And these are important concerns. And this is actually one of the reasons why, going back to the original question, why the United States should have perhaps got involved from the word go, because this is an area where they could have played a constructive role in helping the AIIB develop. But it is going to be important that the AIIB does work and complements the activities of the Asian Development Bank in particular. Nobody wants sort of overlapping or competing institutions providing finance. It's going to be very, very important from the outset that the AIIB works closely with other partners in the development world. And the indications are that they will, which is to be welcomed.